Hello. Welcome to the Mill Valley Public Library. My name is Deborah Schwartz, and I'm on the Board of Directors for the Mill Valley Historical Society. I'm co-in charge of the first Wednesday speaker series with Stella Peroni right there, and also the oral history program. Thank you all for being here tonight. Some places just feel like home, don't they? This place feels like home. So relaxed and so beautiful, and the Mill Valley Historical Society is so grateful to be able to host our speaker series here at the library. And for that, we are very grateful, and we say thank you. One of the other ways that we show our gratitude with these presentations is after the event has ended, and when people are milling about talking with each other, we put the seats, all the chairs, back on the racks and move the furniture back to its original position. So anybody that cares to help with that, we really appreciate it. Here's a little bit about the timing of tonight's talk. Our presenter is going to speak for about an hour, and I kindly ask that all questions be held for the 15-minute Q&A after. And then we have, after the Q&A, we have a special musical guest, Dory Collar, who's going to be performing a song specially selected for tonight's theme. And then after that, we get kicked out of the library. Tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce local historian Dewey Livingston. He's a map archivist for the Survey Map Collection and has been studying and writing about Marin County for over 35 years. He's a historian and curator at the Jack Mason Museum of West Marin History and has authored major studies with the National Park Service. His books include Nicasio, the historic valley at the Center of Marin in the Heart of Marin, the history of Kentfield and Greenbrae, California, and discovering historic ranches at Point Reyes. Tonight, Dewey will be talking about the ways history is revealed through historic maps. But what compelled Dewey to become a historian? The fact is, although his family once lived in Sausalito, they moved to Pasadena, and that's where he was born. And that's where he spent his early childhood. But his family would come to Marin County and to Mount Tamalpais regularly, and he grew up hearing stories of this area. So when they finally moved back, Dewey said it felt like he was coming home. He always had an interest in history, although growing up he thought to himself, I'll be a cameraman. But while he was studying at Redwood High, his interest in history continued. And he had heard about a historian named Jack Mason, a Marin County man who was the author of 8 books. And Dewey wanted to meet him, even though he heard that Jack was kind of a cranky old guy. And so, armed with the curiosity and the courage of youth, he decided to go to Jack's house unannounced, knock on the door, and introduce himself, fully expecting the door to slam in his face. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, what happened was this very nice, friendly man in the later years of his life, settling, to that last stage of his life, greeted him quite warmly. And Dewey found that he was quite willing to share his knowledge. And in that way, a seasoned historian handed the baton over to the seasoned historian we have here tonight. So that's a little bit about Dewey, and now we'll hear some more about what you have to share, Dewey. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Dewey Livingston.
Thank you. Thank you. Whoa, thank you. Thank you. This is an amazing big crowd here, so I'm really glad you all showed up, and I hope you enjoy the show. Since I'm here in Mill Valley, and I hope you can see we're here. Since I'm coming to Mill Valley with a show that doesn't have much about Mill Valley in it, I thought I should throw a few things in. So here's a picture. I don't know if you've seen it before. It was recently given to the California Room, showing right about where we are right now in about 1893, I understand. I believe the library is now over off to the left there. This is where the old mill school, is that right? I ought to clear that with the experts here. But my talk tonight really is more general. We call it Marin Revealed Through Historic Maps. This is a rerun in a sense, but I don't know how many of you made it up to my talk at the new Antique Kent, California Room map annex that's off of Lucas Valley Road in San Rafael. And I was asked to step in fairly recently, so this was a good show to give. It's going to be a little look at how you can use maps to further understand the history of the place you live in. And I take it in some directions. You've seen rephotography before, where you find an old photo and then you go take the exact picture. Well, I've been doing that with maps too. So we're going to look into some of that. And this is really based on my work with the Marin County Library. It's a very part-time job, but we have opened within the last year an incredible collection of unrecorded survey maps that go back to the 1850s. In fact, there's one from 1849 that you'll see here of Sausalito. It's over 30,000 maps, and these are unrecorded surveys. So these are maps that most people have never seen before. And it's these collections from surveyors like Hiram Austin and George M. Dodge, J.C. Oglesby, a number of familiar names to historians, through the years that stayed with one firm and finally was sold to the county library. So that facility is available for research on Thursday afternoons. And so I'm going to feature a fair amount of what is in that collection, but a lot more. Okay. So, let's go. I'm going to talk a little about my interest in maps first, and I know that there are a lot of map nuts out here, and we're going to look at a lot of maps, so I'll try not to go too fast, but I also don't want to go too long. But I grew up loving maps, and it had to do mostly with road trips around California. And I have 3 other siblings, and we all had the maps out when we were driving and kept track of where we were going and looked out the window. And this is before everybody was doing this when they're in the car. So it was really wonderful to drive around California in the 50s and 60s and see all these places and really know where you're going. So the AAA maps and the gas station maps that you got, that was a big part of many of our growing up. And learning about the places we lived and the nearby places. Well, I was 15 when we moved back to Marin County, and I really kind of wanted to escape. And of course, Mount Tamalpais was right there, so I immediately started hiking Mount Tam and very quickly found Harry Freese's map of Mount Tamalpais that was originally published in the early 50s, I think, maybe even started in the late 40s. And they're wonderful, simple maps, hand-drawn, that can guide you all over the mountain. They had wonderful details, like you can see up here on the right, Camp Handy and the bee tree, and especially to a teenage boy, the nudist's nest that you see down on the left was particularly provocative. We were greatly disappointed when we finally scratched our way down there. This was an old map, and the nudist's nest was long gone. But it was really great to have these maps and find our way around and share the maps and mark where you've been on the hiking maps. This is the late 60s and early 70s I'm talking about. So when I started making maps, which was just sort of a natural thing because I wanted to be an artist and this and that, I basically copied Harry Freese and his style, and so when I made maps, like this is for Barry Spitz's book, the earlier editions of Tamalpais Trails, I found that Harry's maps were simple and easy to read, and so I copied him, basically. I didn't trace him, but I mean, I liked his style. Well, I also discovered Topo Maps, and Topo Maps was a real new way into the world of Mount Tam and Point Reyes and anywhere else we went, you know, hiking in the Sierras, whatever. And so Topo Maps are another great love of many of us. I can just imagine in this crowd how many Topo Maps people have spirited away. So I started looking into Topo Maps and seeing that there are beautiful ones that have been made around the world. Bradford Washburn worked with Swiss cartographers to make wonderful maps of places around the world. This is Squam Lake area on the East Coast, but look at just how what great cartography, and it's like art. And then you go to his map of Mount Everest that was done for the National Geographic Society, and it's just the graphic quality of these and also the accuracy just can't be beat. So these were always very inspiring. So, of course, I tried to copy those by making historical maps of West Marin using hatchering and stuff, and they don't even, they're kind of neat, but they don't hold a candle to those fine craftsmen. And eventually, with the help of Jackie Phelan and others, made a map of the repack race, the mountain bike race, in 1984. And this map people were wanting this map all the time. Now that mountain biking is such an international deal, it just got published in a book and then in a magazine, and it's all over the place. So that's been a lot of fun. Jackie made up all those names on the turn. I liked that, I especially liked Vendetti's face. Isn't that where he... Yeah. And so then now in the modern days of computers, you can make maps using programs like Illustrator. And with the help of my son-in-law, who did the terrain modeling, we put together this map for an exhibit of all the historical routes to and from Bolinas. This was for an exhibit at the Bolinas Museum. So I not only love maps, I like to make them too, in addition to, and it really fits in with the history that I do, and with the friends of mine who are into this too. We're all kind of map geeks as much as anything. And even it comes in handy in my professional work and archaeology and this and that of mapping historic sites and using all sorts of forms of GPS and Google Earth and all of that. So this is the Providence Mountains in Southern California, but an obscure town. But so Marin County has a really good legacy of map making going back quite a ways. Of course, we became a county when California became a state in 1850, and it's a unique place to look at from above. And so I think map makers have had a lot of fun with Marin County. The San Andreas Fault slicing right through there, San Francisco Bay, the ocean, the Golden Gate. It's a place we all believe is a special place, and I think that the maps are special of it. The first good map of the entire county that we know of was done in 1860 by Aaron Van Dorn. And many of you remember Fred Sandrock and the Mount Tamalpais History Project. He was really into this map and wrote about it. 1860, it has a lot of good detail. You'll see some a little later of what was going on. This is before the county was very developed at all. There weren't any formal roads or anything at the time. Our favorite map, it tends to be most people's favorite historic map, is the 1873 map of Marin County put together by Hiram Austin. And there are many versions of it. This one is a black and white version that makes it easier to look at. We have an original copy of it, and they're very rare to find at our map collection up on Lucas Valley Road that you can come in and look at. It has great detail, and now by this time Marin County is starting to develop. There are a few more towns, there are some more formal roads, but it's still pretty primitive. And it tells all of the landowners and the parcels of land, and it's amazing to see how much of that, especially in the western and northern part of the county, has remained constant today. You'll see an old land boundary from 150 years ago almost, and it's the same today. And then many people have seen the 1892 map of Marin County by George M. Dodge. And it again has a lot of good detail, landowners, this and that. Now these maps weren't just made by illustrators or people wandering around and drawing a map. These maps and most of the maps you're going to see tonight were made by surveyors who were very highly trained, often civil engineers. And the techniques have evolved over the years, where now it's mostly computer driven. They're finding that surveyors today aren't in the field as much as they used to be, and a lot is done by aerial photography and this and that. But surveying is a very precise discipline that I could never approach because it involves math and trigonometry and all of that. But it's very difficult, and you really have to work at it. This is Bill Schroeder with a more modern computerized, I think this is called a total station. He's the one who sold the map collection to the county. He volunteers with us and knows everything about it. But so I've really gained a lot of respect for land surveyors, and because everything you see that is a good map is a result of a lot of very careful work on the ground and then careful work in the studio. These old surveyors put together, they went out in the field and they kept these field books. And so when you look in a field book, and we have all these surveyors' field books going back to the 1860s in this collection. And usually you look in it and it's a bunch of calculations and numbers, and there's not too much that's going to be helpful to the historian or this or that. And even the modern surveyors find this isn't particularly of great use. Sometimes, though, there's a sketch in there. So this is a place on the corner of C and 3rd Street in San Rafael, and you look closer at it, and this is in the 1880s, and there's the carriage shed and the blacksmith shop and the sleeping house and all sorts of detail that you wouldn't find in any other record. I liked this one, the cigar store, and then the barber shop on the end. So these field books have a lot of surprises in them, but you have to look for them. One of our favorite is, Fred Runner, are you here tonight? I didn't see you. This one was pretty exciting. This one we found, notice it says level MV and MTTSR, the Mill Valley and Mount Tamalpais Scenic Railway. These are the original survey books from when they laid out the mountain railway. And there were a few things that were quite interesting in them. You see here we have alignment of the Mill Valley, etc. August 1896, so it was right when they were getting ready for construction. George M. Dodge, who was the county surveyor for quite a few years, put this together. We found it very interesting. Well, here's one. He just made one notation: Mount Tamalpais Grand View. Anyway, we like little personal parts. But this part was really interesting. It says A-Line Tamalpais Mountain Electric Railway. And this was the first clue that Fred had seen. I don't know if anybody else had heard this, that it was planned originally as an electric railway. And that didn't happen, but that's a nice little footnote that was learned from these. But the most exciting thing was that Fred had always heard, and others had heard, that George Dodge, when he was trying to figure out how to make elevation going up this mountain, in the middle of the night he realized that by making a big loop like this, he could gain a lot of elevation at this particular point. And the story goes that in the middle of the night he reached over and he sketched it, so the next morning he could figure out how it really worked. Well, we looked through these, and in the opening page of one of them, and this is what they came up with, and in the opening page, there's that drawing. Now, we can't say for sure that that is his midnight drawing of the double bow knot, but we've heard that story before this thing was ever seen, and he ended up finding that way to gain elevation. So there's a lot of fun little things to find out. But most of the surveys in our collection are kind of boring. They're good if you're a homeowner and it's one of your particular lot or this or that, but they're measurements and surveys. But there, again, there's a lot to find in there. Sometimes there are old ones that we can learn a lot from, of land divisions. This is out on Tamalpais Bay in 1880. James Miller, who was prominent in the eastern part of Marin County, and Miller Creek and all that. But he also founded Millerton, if you're familiar with that little community or ex-community on Tamalpais Bay. Hiram Austin was one of the early county surveyors, and when he died, we found this obituary that we thought was kind of fun, and I'm going to read it for you if you don't mind. The deceased was one of the most noted characters around Marin County in the early days. He was universally known as the professor, partly because he had never been one, and partly perhaps for the same reasons that induce some people to apply that title to the editor of this paper. From way back in the early 50s down to the time when he left this section, he held the office of county surveyor with only 1 or 2 breaks in the succession. And by the way, the county surveyor in that period of time, the 1870s, 80s, up into the 20th century, held a lot of power. It was an elected office, and they were one of about the 5 people who kind of ran the county. He either conducted or was connected with about all the important surveys upon which much of the titles to property rights in Marin depend, and it is safe to say that he made acquaintance in a professional way with every acre in the county. How the old man managed to get through the vast tramps, often over high mountain ranges and the roughest kind of country, which his occupation demanded, was a mystery. His bulk was enormous, and anyone who looked at his aldermanic proportions would have considered that he was doing well if he managed to walk around a level block without a stroke of apoplexy. And this impression was strengthened by the fact that on the slightest exertion he blew and wheezed worse than a spermaceti whale. Yet, notwithstanding these apparent handicaps, he got there just the same, and usually a little better than the athletic young men who prided themselves on their physical powers. Occasionally, some of his field men, not posted on the facts, engaged in conspiracies to rush work over a rough piece of country and break the professor down. The intended victim was always on the lookout for schemes of the sort, and the upshot of them was invariably that the conspirators found themselves imploring the old man in the name of everything beautiful and sacred to give them a rest. We don't know how much of this is mythology, but it is true that a surveyor has to go remarkable places to make a survey, and if you consider breaking through the brush up on Mount Tam and the Manzanita and this and that to make a survey, it was a lot of work, and these fellows did that. He was succeeded by George M. Dodge, who had a long time living in Marin County and did much of the work that we have in our collection. Now, I mentioned about rephotography. I like to do that, where you find an old photo and you make a new, see what it looked like. And I did a little series for the University of California Cooperative Extension, looking for places of farmland and where it has gone today. Because Marin County used to be an agrarian county. It still largely is, but I was tasked with finding old pictures and comparing them and trying to set it up as close as possible. This is the fields of the Meadow Sweet Dairy in Corte Madera, and here's how it looks today. And you can see that, well, we've had some progress here. Here is the county fair in Novato, the first of the Marin County fairs, looking down about where Olive Avenue is. The photographer was standing up on a hill looking south. Downtown Novato is over in here. And it was hard to find this spot because it had been built on so much. But I was able to match it up pretty well. And you can see that the eastern side of the county is the one that's been designated for growth, and so that's fine. The reason we live out in Point Reyes area, though, is because here's the changes from 1927 to now. And we kind of like it that way. So yeah, this rephotography is a lot of fun, and it helps you learn a lot about how things have changed. And more recently, what I've been doing is showing it to people with getting you familiar with where you are and then taking you back. And some of this is my West Marin area, so if you're familiar with Point Reyes Station and Olema, you'll recognize some of these views. This is coming into Point Reyes Station from Highway 1, and here's how it looked in 1914, the same view. Still a small town, but it's been grown, it has grown around it. And a lot of trees, and you'll find that anywhere, that trees have been planted all over the place. I'm a great believer, and I believe it's a fact that there are way more trees in Marin County than there were 150 years ago, despite what you hear about logging and this and that. But here's our main street in Point Reyes Station. The old depot is now the post office, but this was the scene around 1915. And this will be an obscure spot. You probably won't recognize it. It's on Highway 1, just south of Point Reyes Station. But I really love the going back picture. Yeah, this was Mike Contos's hedge, and it was still tended into the 1970s. Picture was taken in the 1950s, but it's been let go. I'm really sorry to say, because that would be a fun thing. And it was kind of a tourist attraction. You've probably been to Olema and maybe stopped at the farmhouse there for a meal or this or that. And it's seen better days in the 50s when this picture was taken, but they're still there. Sometimes you run across a real gem in that you can actually put together 3 pictures in a sequence. Fred Runner, I think is right, sent this picture to a group of us. This is a view from Mount Tamalpais looking down towards northern San Francisco Bay. And you can see this is San Quentin out here. Here's the Corte Madera and Larkspur Flats. There's Richmond across the bay, Mount Diablo. So this is Corte Madera, this is Larkspur. Kentfield would be over here. Well, this was taken in 1898, and I looked at it for a while and then realized that a friend of mine, Don Gunn, had given me a picture from the same view that he took in 1958. So 60 years later, we had a matching view, 1958. And you can see that they're starting to fill in the marshland here. The highway's been improved. Whoops, I went the wrong way, I gave it away. But anyway, you can see that there's been some changes. Well, then Brad Rippey, bless his heart, ran up the mountain and he took the view today. So here we have 60 years apart, each one, views of the same, and you can really watch it. Now, I know that there are young people who could really line these up just perfectly. I don't have the patience, but it's pretty good. And then another thing Fred sent us was this view of the trestle, the road trestle across the tracks at Alto, just east of here. And this was taken in 1930. That was another one where I scratched my head and it made me think of something, and then I realized, well, I have a survey map of this same scene in 1930 at the same time. And so here's the survey map. Here's the trestle going across the tracks. Here's the tracks going this is towards Alto here. And here's Blythedale. Now it cuts through like this. But you see the hill here, it's starting, they've been laying out a street here. You go back and look, they're cutting the street. I don't know the name of that hill, but some of you probably live on it. And here's Blythedale going into Mill Valley. So that's kind of a funny juxtaposition of here you have a photo and then a map of the same location at the same time. And then to more familiarize it, here's the train going through. There's the Blythedale used to go across a bridge to get across the busy tracks. We're looking south towards Sausalito. So this survey collection, like I said, has some very old items, and it's been fun sort of matching them up with what's there today. This is our oldest map that we found so far, April 1849. Sausalito tract, the Richardson family was selling it to Charles T. Botts, we think. So, and here's what the map looks like. It's hand-drawn, has some coloring. It's in pretty good condition. It's been folded and this and that. Look at it a little more closely, and there are some interesting details because, you know, this is where William Richardson settled. This is where whalers came in to get water. It was mainly known as a place to get fresh water and a quiet cove to repair ships. And so the springs were very important here. And I don't know that you can see it clearly, but it marks where the springs are in here. It also marks the old trails of how you got through Sausalito waterfront, because it was a rocky coast. That wasn't the way you traveled before there were roads. You went up in the hills and over, because otherwise you'd have to cut all these cliffs and this and that. So when you look at this same view today on Google Earth, it's Old Town Sausalito, and things have really changed a bit. But and they've rounded out Sausalito Point here that you barely notice that it's there, but it used to be quite a geographical feature. And then into downtown Sausalito. This is where the ferry landing is basically today. Water Street is now Bridgeway, where it makes the turn. The Princess Saloon, notice here, it's at this wonky angle, but they're laying out streets that don't quite fit. The Princess Saloon predated building those streets. So let's look at it today and watch that Princess Saloon to begin with. It's still basically there in the strange way, and that's where Princess Street goes off of Bridgeway. These aren't showing up as quite as bright as they should, but I don't think we can dim lights much more, can we, legally? But you'll also see, now here's the current ferry landing down here in the corner, and so when we go back, you'll also see this was all water here. There was the original wharf, and the wharf down a little farther south than where they are today. And this has all been filled in, the parking lot and the Dunphy Park and where the ferry landing is today. So you can really see how things have changed as far as reclaiming tidelands and this and that. Let's go over to Belvedere, Tiburon, and Corinthian Island. Here's the old survey from the late 1850s. We have an original linen copy of it. And you can see that Belvedere Lagoon is really a lagoon at the time. If we jump up to 1952 in the same view, you can see they're starting to fill in the lagoon. And you can see all the rail yards. So for the railroad buffs, it's a really nice clear view of the rail yards. And then here it is today. So that's kind of a fun sequence. Mill Valley, I'm not going to ignore Mill Valley at all, and this was already in the original show, but there's always been interest in where Reed's adobe was. And Betty called me up a few years ago to see if I could help with this, and I don't know how much this ended up helping, but I put together a little sequence to figure out exactly where his house was. This is the land grant plat, but it doesn't have enough detail to really give you a sense of where it was. So this is a map from 1873 that the United States government did. This is just a detail, but here's Widow Reed Creek and the marsh. This is now Camino Alto going across, and then it eventually goes up in the hill here, so Alto is up here. Blythedale now goes down here. But there's the house right there. So then line that up with an 1899 survey. Still there, or at least there's a fence and an orchard, probably a building. And you can also sort of see how things have, oops, I'm getting my things wrong here. You can see how a little bit changed, the rail line in there. And then you take it to a modern topo map, and there's where it would be. And I think it's been figured out exactly what its address is. But so by going through from 1859, 73, 99, 54, and today, and so I know that you put up a plaque at the location. I don't know if my spot made it, but using old maps, of course, is a way of finding archaeological resources and finding where things used to be, especially when things have changed a lot. Out where I live near Olema, I was been forever interested in finding the exact location of Rafael Garcia's adobe. He settled there in the late 1830s and had quite a big ranch. One of the original Mexican land grantees. Well, ran across this survey in the collection from 1869 when they were laying out the road that we now know as Bear Valley Road, and lo and behold, there is the old adobe house marked on it right in the vicinity where I thought it had been. So I lined it up, I made a tracing, and then lined it up with a Google Earth view, or a Google Maps, and put it together, and now we can know much more closely the location of Garcia's adobe. Unfortunately, it's an area that's been bulldozed and used a lot over the years, so I don't know if much will be found, but it could be. The park archaeologists are interested in this now. The lighter wharf in Bolinas Lagoon has always been of great interest, and here's an old survey from 1873 of when they first laid out a road along the west side of the lagoon, and here it has the wharf, the wood landing, and you can see exactly where it was by lining it up with a modern view. These maps are kind of fun. The 1893, I know that the Historical Society has a good, really beautiful version of the Tamalpais Land and Water Company ranches that were given letters of the alphabet, similar to the ones out at Point Reyes and Novato. So this is a simpler version of the map, but it has some very interesting details. So here we are out at, here's Muir Beach, right here, coming along Slide Ranch, etc., over to where Stinson Beach is, and up to Mount Tamalpais, 1893. You get in on the details, and they've marked in where the fields are. So if you're studying agriculture or land use, rerouting of creeks, this and that, these are very helpful. Wonderful detail here. So I lined this one up, because many of you might remember the Banducci's and their flower farms there up above Muir Beach. So here's a view from 1952 when the Banducci's were active, and then lining it up today where well, here's the community of Muir Beach, but those fields have been abandoned. But we could go back to 1893 and know that those fields were that old, that place has been tilled for that long. I liked this one. This is the White Gate Ranch overlooking Stinson Beach. This is it was always a landmark on the Dipsy race, and the old highway that went up Steep Ravine, different from how Highway 1 does today. This is the White Gate Ranch. It shows a field. It even shows a lake, which is long gone. And that's the White Gate Ranch and an old view of Stinson Beach. And here's a survey for A.H. Stinson, one of the founders of Stinson Beach. It shows the old road that was built in 1870 by Hiram Austin and his crew, going through what's now Stinson Beach. So you zoom in on it, and here you see Escoot with two buildings. Well, Alfred Escoot was an old sea captain. He was the first county surveyor, and he lived there till the end of his life. He was really known as a cranky old guy, but he also started to develop some of the attractions of Stinson Beach as a place to come and play. And it was just neat seeing this, because we have a picture of those two buildings. There's his house and there's his barn, and here they are depicted on the survey map. So we can kind of confirm what he was doing there. Willows, this lagoon down here was called Poison Pond, and it was filled in quite a few years ago for a parking lot. And so you compare it today, and Stinson Beach is pretty well developed. It has a wonderful library, though. My wife, Carrie, is the librarian there, so I got to put in a plug for her, because it is a great library, although we're stunned by how big and beautiful this library is. This is one of my favorites. We found this old survey of the Olema Cemetery. You know, a survey isn't just for property. We have surveys for Mount Tamalpais Cemetery, for instance, in San Anselmo and San Rafael, that are very detailed down to who's buried in what plot. And this is the Olema Cemetery. It was laid out by Dodge in 1880, and if you go up in the air and look at it, hey, they stuck to that pretty well. So you even have to be careful how you lay out your grave sites. We were fortunate to find this 1879 map of Point Reyes. Now, this is the area that I work out of mostly, done for the landowner as he was dividing it up into an ill-fated plan to sell 100-acre plots. It was all dairy ranches, but it has incredible detail. Here's Kaiser's Ranch, which is the B Ranch. You see the B up there? They had divided those into letters as well, showing where the buildings were. But we're especially fascinated, and I think land managers too, at that these are springs, these little squares with a circle in it. So he plotted all the springs on the Point Reyes Peninsula at that period of time, 1879, And so if you line this up, not everything lines up perfectly, but you see down here, again, it's a little hard to get all of the detail, but there's this wet area here draining down, and those are the springs that show up in 1879. Now, I just love detail like that and confirming that some things haven't changed. Here is the area called Schooner Creek, and you might not be able to see too well, but it says cemetery here. Here's the road out to Point Reyes, near where the road to the oyster company used to go off. But there's the cemetery, and then up here, notice it says schoolhouse. So in order to find those places, it's easy to find the cemetery. It has a grove of trees, and you can even take a trail up to it. It's a rancher's cemetery, and then it's the life-saving service cemetery, where there are 5 members of they're called surfmen, members of the U.S. life-saving station that was there, and they died in the surf and drills and were buried there. But we can also find the location of the old schoolhouse, which is long gone, hasn't been there since 1920 or so. I've always been fascinated with Muldrow City. This is on Tamalpais Bay. This is the only map I've found it on for many years. This was an official government survey made in 1859. And here is marked Muldrow City and what was going on there. And it took some research to find out a little more about Muldrow City. And meanwhile, in our survey collection, we found a more detailed map that showed everybody who lived in Muldrow City. You can see McKnight here. He had a chicken farm there. And unfortunately, he was murdered. And that was a big scandal in the county for a while. But a number of people came and started to settle Muldrow City. And Lindsay's Hotel shows that there was an attraction there that could bring people from outside or travelers. Well, Muldrow was Colonel William Muldrow, and he was a shyster. He came from the Midwest. I think he kind of had to flee because he laid out a city on the banks of the Missouri River that he called Marion City. You can look this up. It's all pretty well documented. And he sold lots, and he promised a railroad all the way to the West Coast and all the services you would ever want. And of course, within a year or so, high water came through and swept most of it away. And he ended up having to leave the country. And he came west with the gold rush, and then he claimed that he owned the whole California coast from Point Reyes up to Cape Mendocino, and he had the piece of paper to prove it. And so you learn more about him, and you go, oh, God. And he got in a lot of trouble in Sacramento, too. Colonel Muldrow. Well, he landed on Tamalpais Bay, apparently, finding, well, here's a place I can do something. So he started Muldrow City. And this is as far as it got. And he ended up, after being in trouble in Sacramento and around here, he didn't own this land, but he started apparently selling lots and this and that with his name on the city. But you go there today, usually we've looked at these pictures and there's not much there, and now there's all sorts of houses and stuff. Well, you go here today and there's nothing there. This is Muldrow City. It's now in the state park system, part of Tamalpais Bay State Park. All there is this house across the road. So it went from a pretty busy little place to almost nothing, but it's nice that way. Tamalpais. I guess the timing's okay. I'm not too long here. I know it's kind of far from here, but the town of Tamalpais, if you haven't gone and explored around, it's the best place in the county if you want a feeling of going back in time. Very undeveloped, almost all the historical buildings still there. And you might have heard that here's downtown Tamalpais, but Tamalpais used to be down here. This is called Keys Creek that goes up, and they were able to bring schooners, small, shallow draft schooners, all the way up to what was the town of Tamalpais. It became Lower Town because Warren Dutton, one of the partners, ended up building a town up high. And one of the reasons was that area down below started to silt in, and you could no longer bring boats up there. Well, we found this very old survey, probably from about 1860, of Lower Town, Tamalpais, and they've laid out streets and lots. Now, that didn't come to be, but it does show the detail of the warehouse and the channel and how, and there's a landing over here. And so this was all at high tide, was all full of water. And you go there today to the same spot. Well, oh, here I'm zooming in a little just to see. Here's a steamer wharf and the boathouse and the bridge. And you go there today and it's just fields. So if I go back, this one, here's the hotel. Keyes, John Keyes had that hotel. And you go back and look, that building's still there. From 1860 to 2017. Now, 2018. And all of this water is fields. And there's barely any water in the creek anymore. So that's amazing how much that has changed. So, and then San Geronimo. I'm really into old roads. Somewhat old railroads, but mostly old roads. And this is a view of here's the golf course, the road over to Nicasio, from San Geronimo over to Nicasio. And we have a survey dated 1867 when they first laid out the road from White's Valley, which is now San Geronimo Valley, and it wound up and around and over through the top and down into the Nicasio Valley. This was done by Hiram Austin. You look at an old, sorry, oh man, I'm not good on the keys tonight. You look at the old survey and line it up with the 1952 version, and you can still see the old route up there going that way. And there were actually 3 roads up. The one you take today is the 3rd road, because a second one replaced this one going up this way, and you can see that. And it wound up around and went up. So, and then you take it today, and you still even can see the old highway over to Nicasio. And then this is another of our oldest maps. This is from the 1850s. This is San Geronimo Valley that they called White's Valley. And the thing I like about this is that it shows White's potato house. I don't know how many of you are aware that Marin County used to be a big potato growing area in the very early days with Irish immigrants, and especially in Tamalpais, but around Bolinas, Olema, and the San Geronimo Valley. And now we know here's where Lorenzo White lived. You've heard of White's Hill. Lorenzo White rented the property. He had a potato house. There was a bridge to get across White's Hill. And so lining it up, now we can sort of figure fairly closely that his potato house was over there by the Flanders Ranch and where his original house was, etc. And the map goes on and gives you ideas about the early pioneers of the Ross Valley. Now, there are scientific applications to these old surveys too. There's a very talented woman who's a hydrologist, or actually I think a geomorphologist, something like that. I'm sorry, I don't have the term exactly, but she studies the waterways in Marin County on contract, and she did a long-term study of Corte Madera Creek going through the Ross Valley. And she came up with some really interesting determinations based just on groundwork mostly. And then this map turned up in the survey collection. Again, we're just discovering these. It's the first time somebody's looked through them methodically with a historical interest. Here's a map from about 1874 this is the town of Ross now. There's nothing there at the time. The Rosses lived there. And this is where Kentfield is down here, called Ross Landing. And it had a lot of neat little details, like the wheat field tract, which was similar to where Catherine Branson School is now. And Albert E. Kent, the Kent estate where Kent Woodlands is. Always interesting to see the Cooper House was this old house that was there before the Kents came. The first farm in Marin County that we know of in 1845 was there. Things like the new Lagunitas Road, if you go out to Phoenix Lake, and there it marks, well, there's the old road and how you used to go around the edge of the redwoods to get in there. And here's Ross Landing, which is now Kentfield. And if you line this up with a current day view, that's College of Marin. Here's College Avenue, Sir Francis Drake. So this is that new administration building at College of Marin, the library, going back. But this was when it was just merely Ross Landing. And something that's always fascinated us, Richard Torney's here, who really helped with the Kentfield book that we put together. Notice this big curve in the creek. Well, that was straightened out to go straight through like this. But the old creek made this big bend. Today, when you look at this, you can see the remnants of that bend in the way that the property lines are laid out. And if you go in there, you'll see there's really weird property lines that curve around. Well, that's because that's where the creek was, and they established those property lines in the old days. And then these poor buildings here, the Half Day Cafe and the, well, it was Ambrosia, are sitting on an old creek bed on fill. So hang on if you have an earthquake, I'd say. But anyway, the point about Laurel Collins, who is the hydromorphologist, I think might be the term, was that she had determined that there was an original route of Corte Madera Creek that went down the west side of the valley and joined in with Corte Madera Creek at Ross Valley. She had, again, just through field work and deduction, this is the current route of the creek that we all know, the one that was channelized. And this map proves her point after she had figured it out, because it has the old channel of the arroyo and the new channel of the arroyo. And it had been realigned up by the Ross station to accommodate the railroad going up the valley. So, yeah, here's where the tracks were going to cross, so they cut this off, basically. And now this is just sort of a slough that, I guess it gets some water in it from runoff and a little tide water called Murphy Creek. Is that right, Richard? So anyway, really, really neat map. And it's a fun one to overlay. Here again, we're going to step back a little, and here's the scene again today. Here's Sir Francis Drake, College Avenue, Kent Avenue, and the College of Marin, back when it was just fields and a couple of houses, and these two creek channels running through. San Rafael was laid out as a grid. It's one of the only towns around here that was laid out in that traditional manner. You just draw a bunch of squares, basically. This was laid out in 1859. And you can look a little closer. Here's Marin Square was going to be a public area, and it didn't turn out to be. But you line this up with a current day map. It's kind of hard to do. But the Marin Square, did I get that right, is here, and it's been built on. It wasn't the place where they ended up building the courthouse. But we have a number of old maps of San Rafael that have a lot of detail. Like you can see, here's the old Marin Hotel. This says CH. That's the courthouse. Now, that's not the courthouse that many of us remember facing, you know, the big with the columns and all that facing 4th Street. This was Timoteo Murphy's adobe house that was used as a courthouse when after it became a county, and was later torn down. And they built the Marin County courthouse here on what they're calling Block 12. But anyway, these old maps, there's the Shepherd House, a very pioneer hotel. And so these old maps have a lot of history in them, and you can line them up with what's there now. Here's the Catholic cemetery. And this part I love because it really outlines where the Mission Orchard was, with their legendary pear trees and I'm sure other types of fruit. But this is also fascinating because here's the Turnpike Road. In 1865, a road was built from San Rafael straight out. I'm going to show you more detail of this, straight out to San Quentin, which is where the ferry came. So San Rafael being the only major town, Ross Landing was another, but where people were going back and forth to San Francisco. So a turnpike road was built to make it much quicker to get out there. And here we found, this is the only place we've ever seen that it locates a toll gate on it, because you paid a toll to go out there. Now, that's an interesting little place that jumps off of the grid. A little later map, you can see, here's the grid of San Rafael, but the Turnpike Road went off at an angle to get to Point San Quentin. And that road is still there partly. So if you go today, it's that little strip. You know where Marin Color is? On Lincoln Avenue? Here's 2nd Street. That little bit. And then a little bit here onto whatever they call that, Francisco Boulevard, is the old Turnpike Road from 1865, the major road in that area. And that's our last little remnant. If you go to, there's Marin Color, there's that little place where it merges in. Little piece of, you wouldn't know it unless you started poking into these kind of details. This is a wonderful map from the 1870s that was done by William Hammond Hall. He was a very noted civil engineer and surveyor. He laid out Golden Gate Park Worked with John McLaren then with vegetating it and designing it, and other many things if you look up William Hammond Hall. And we have one original map of the Coleman edition of San Rafael, and very nicely drawn. Has a lot of good details, like where people lived and the churches and the post office. The railroad depot, because in 1870 they started a rail line out to Point San Quentin, so you could take the toll road or you could take the railroad. And it showed things like springs and water tunnels and quarries, all very early. These are all in neighborhoods now. And then I love the way he depicted these, what you can just imagine is a lovely little scene with the creek going through and the hillside. Of course, you go here today from the air and it's kind of depressing, but this is downtown San Rafael basically. Dominican College is part of this. You're in the Dominican area and Highway 101 going through. Now, if you're that familiar with San Rafael and getting on the freeway, you know this on-ramp from Irwin Street going on to Highway 101, and then you'll go north to Terra Linda from there. Well, this was the location of Oliver Irwin's orchard. And boy, I hate to see the difference there, because look at what this and Stevens. I'm not sure too much about Stevens, but look at all these trees that they've laid out. I'm only speculating that it was an orchard. It could have been a nursery or some other way, but very nicely done with even trees lining Irwin Street. There it is from a little more of a distance. But you look at this scene today, and it's hard to even fathom that it was once this lovely scene. Now, I mentioned the Turnpike Road, and so this is a good map to look at the evolution of how you got out to the ferry from San Rafael in the early days, because the ferry it would take too long to come all the way in. You could bring some shallow draft ships into San Rafael, some barges and this and that, but it took a long time, and so it was much more efficient to take off from San Quentin, from Agnes Island, was a little island at the tip there. And so this is a map that George M. Dodge made of the Coleman Tract, but here's downtown San Rafael is off of the map right up here, and Point San Quentin is right here. In fact, there's Agnes Island, which no longer exists. But you look at this map, here's a little detail. You're now, this is, well, you remember Marin Surplus? That was right about here. What's the landmark there today that I could get people? But it's where the freeway comes down from Greenbrae and over into San Rafael. Yeah, Rafael Lumber is down around in here. Notice Sims Island. But anyway, in the early days, they had to build, in the early days, this is where the water came at high tide, right? So when you don't have a lot of labor and resources and you're going to build roads around the county, you need to go around the edge. So, this is the first road out to San Quentin. You're not building across the marsh. That takes a lot of money and labor. So you follow the edge of the marsh. Then they built the Turnpike Road that I mentioned around 1865, and it came out and they were able to finance building a road across the marsh. And then in 1869 and 70 they built the San Rafael and San Quentin Railroad. So now you had 3 routes out there. Not too many people used the old route. And then the San Francisco and North Pacific Railroad was put in 1884, I think, and that's the one that Smart is eventually going to reach Larkspur Landing on. Goes into the tunnel here. You know, the tunnel has been rehabilitated. So you have 4 different ways to get through the neighborhood, evolving over a fairly short period of time. Sims Island, keep an eye on that because we're going to go to the present. Now you can see the patterns are still there. You see here, this is where the 2 old rail lines crossed. And you can see it curving around here, and you can see basically 580 follows the old Turnpike Road. And Anderson Drive follows the old San Quentin Railroad. But you look at land and you look at the patterns that are on it in a map or an aerial photo, And by looking into the past, you can see, oh, well, here's why they did that, and this is what that is. Why did these roads come together in this strange way, or why did they build a house here? And Sims Island, poor Sims Island, was right here, and it was all blasted down. How many of you remember the Motor movies? San Rafael. They built the Motor movies. Now it's Marin Square, I think, shopping center, Marin Surplus. But going back, you see there's Sims Island. And it lines up a little bit, but it's here. And there's still this road that curves through, called Sims Street, is the only road that curves in that area, and that's because it's curving around the old edge of the island. I wondered why that. Yeah. So there are other examples of that. Redwood High School, you go down Doherty Drive, and you hit the high school, and then you go curving around the high school. The high school used to be an island, and that curve, you're going around the edge of the island to the other side. Let's go a little further into San Rafael, a little more obscure area called Laurel Grove Avenue, but you probably all know Irwin Street. It's where you get off on the freeway, and if you go down south to some of the car repair places, do I have it right? Here's Irwin Street. And this was an area called Laurel Grove, not to be confused with Kentfield's Laurel Grove. But it was a popular picnic area. It was a developed area where you could hear bands come and play. They had baseball games there too. And in fact, one of the teams that played there was called the Pacifics. And if you follow baseball today, there's now a team called the Pacifics playing in Albert Park just about a half a mile away from here. But here's Laurel Grove on an old survey. And here's a view. The train used to go by and it had a stop, the San Quentin train. And you could get off and go to Laurel Grove to party. This shows the platform, the flagstaff. It's a really neat map. Shows groves of laurel trees. So you can get a sense that this whole area here was open, and you could listen to bands and plays and this and that going on the platform. You go today, you look a little closer. There's the platform. So we were able to figure out exactly where the platform was. Well, it's suburbia now, but I should go knock on their door and say, hey, do you ever hear music in the middle of the night? But there are some neat details on that map, like here's up on a hill a madrona grove, a grove of madrone trees. So I went up, and this road is there, but there wasn't a madrone tree in sight. They'd all been cut down or died and replaced by something else, and it was suburbia again. But down south of Laurel Grove, there's marked the grove of madrona, live oak, and redwoods, and you go down there and look, and they're still there. They're in a canyon that nobody built in. Oak Point in San Rafael. San Rafael High School would be right about here, and you're heading out Point San Pedro Road. Notice Shaver, and there's a big landing on San Rafael Creek. Isaac Shaver was one of the big lumbermen in the county, and he had sawmills out at Alpine and all over the place, Nicasio, and he shipped his lumber to various places to send it out. And here is a really good document of where Shaver's was. It's now completely obscured. San Rafael Creek has been realigned. Here's the field for San Rafael High School, but Oak Point. But the funny thing is that this road that goes up here is called Embarcadero Road. So somebody knew their history when they were putting that in. That's that view. Because I'm involved with the Marin County Library, and I like going to the Civic Center, and ever since I got my driver's license, spent a lot of time at the Civic Center. This is a promotional brochure for Margarita. And these are the hills where the Frank Lloyd Wright Civic Center were built now. Here's San Pedro Avenue, they call it, going out. I love this, the cheapest suburban property in California. You could have right there just north of San Rafael. And it was all laid out, ready to go, but nothing ever happened, and it remained a dairy ranch. And if this development had happened, we wouldn't have our Marin County Civic Center out there. Here's what the area looked like before they built the Civic Center. Now we're getting up to Novato, and we're going to be done here pretty soon. I'm going over, I see. But the Trumbull house earlier was Sweetser and DeLong's. It was the main ranch house in the Novato Valley. We find it in an old survey when they were laying out the road that goes from Novato out towards Point Reyes. It's called Novato Boulevard now. I took it to 1952, and look at how Novato is still so rural. There are orchards, fields, cows, this and that from that same location. And today, again, it's suburbs. But the old house is still there. It's just a little hard to find, and it's completely surrounded by suburban homes. And this is one of the last, a very early map, 1866, of the Rancho San Jose, which is the Nicasio area. I took a detail of it because it shows the Novato landing. So many of these places, you came up the creek, there was a Mill Valley landing down there not far from De Silva Island. There were landings at Ross Landing, San Rafael, Novato, Las Colinas. And so, but tracking down exactly where they came and how it's changed, there's a really good document of the Novato landing in 1866. And you bring it up to 1952 and you can see that it's been filled and the creek has been rechanneled. The railroad goes through. But here's Novato Boulevard that is still pretty close to the old Pioneer Road. But you see the old Embarcadero is completely gone. And you go there today, just not there. It's a neighborhood. And this is another place where I wonder if the folks living here know that if an earthquake comes, get out of there, because, I don't know, they're all on fill. They're all on places that used to be creeks. And that's another way that these surveys can be helpful. Looking at how Novato has changed so much, this is the 1860 map I showed you earlier. This is the old Novato Boulevard and then heading up towards Olema and Black Point coming out. Look at all the people living out there, Hyatt, Fairchild. Here's Black John, for which Black Point was named. You look at that in the 1873 map, see how it sort of evolves. The maps aren't quite as accurate as today. In 1892, you can see Novato starting to develop. And here it is in 1952. Now 101 goes through. It was a 4-lane highway. Here's Old Novato Boulevard, Black Point. And then today. So it's just fun to see this evolution happen. And then finally, here we go with just a little bit about the Fairfax Bolinas Road that started as the San Rafael and Bolinas Road. Was laid out in 1877 and built in 1878. For Fairfax people, this has some neat little detail. In 1877, there wasn't much going on in Fairfax but this Saloon building. I tried to line this up today, but it's really rather different. But here's downtown, here's Bolinas Road coming out of Fairfax and the Parkade. But then you go up into the hills and it's especially interesting. Here is the Lagunitas Dairy. This is where Bontempi Dam is, Bontempi Lake. And this is the old road coming up, the Stagecoach Road, and this is the cutoff that they were going to build to Fairfax. And the old Lagunitas Dairy was the Bontempi Dairy. That's where Bontempi Lake got its name. It's hard to find many pictures of it, but there are a few. But so you line up this picture. Here's the old stage road coming down. It's called Shaver Grade if you hike out of Phoenix Lake ever. That's the old Stagecoach Road. Here's what it looks like today. This is the upper end of Alpine Lake covering a lot of it, and here's Bontempi Dam backing up. So it's a place you can go and hike around and get a little bit of sense of history. And then a little further downstream, Liberty's Dairy. Liberty Gulch is still a place that you'll find on maps. But Liberty had a dairy, but also then they developed it when the road came through into a roadhouse. It was a very popular place to stop. You could stay, good hunting, fishing, good food there. And the Liberty family and then other families continued operating this until shortly before Alpine Dam covered it all. And this is just a nice view out of an old film called Salome Jane, of the stagecoach roaring down the old Fairfax Bolinas Road. And you can still find this exact curve is still there on the Fairfax Bolinas Road. But this is part of a motion picture. You can see this, and they're barreling down this hill. Oh, gosh, it's really exciting. But so just to end with a few I got to throw in some more Mill Valley because all this Novato stuff, and that's taken us too far afield. But so this is a little bit for the railroad geeks. You might remember that there used to be a trestle that went across to Strawberry Point. That was the original route of the North Pacific Coast Railroad before they realigned it in 1884 to come here towards Mill Valley, and then they built the extension up into Eastland and Mill Valley. This painting shows both. Here's the old route across to Strawberry Point that went over to Corte Madera, and then here's the new route that went and skirted Mill Valley and went into the tunnel over to Corte Madera. Well, we're always looking for images of that trestle, and there are a few, not too many. And I found one in this donation that just recently came. These are the shops at Sausalito, North Pacific Coast shops. This was apparently taken around 1890, but look in the background, and you can see the ruins of the old Strawberry Point trestle. Now, that's something that really gets us where the railroad went type people going, because look at how long that remains of that were staying there. So anyway, Mill Valley, what a lovely place. You're also lucky to live here. I like this view because it's before the mountain railroad scarred the side of the mountain. Bless its heart. But you can imagine if you love that mountain, can you imagine these entrepreneurs come in and build a railroad, those up it? And it took a while for it to heal. So this is a nice view before. And so now it's time to head off to the 2 a.m. club, okay, for your drinks, because I'm sure you'll have a better time there. Oh, no, you probably had a good time here tonight. But thank you for all that. Okay. I'll leave it on that one. Do you want some questions, or are we?
Questions?
Any questions, or otherwise we'll have some nice music.
Yeah, at the College of Marin on your map, there were 2 little mounds.
Mm-hmm.
Were those the Indian mounds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that map shows 4 or 5 what they call rancherias.
Got it. Thanks.
He asked, did you hear the question? Yeah. Oh, he had asked that there were little mounds that showed in the Kentfield map, and were they Indian mounds? And yes, they're marked on that map.
Well, I think we'll go on to the music then.
Yes, thank
you
you.
very much, Dewey. This
Thank
was
you.
wonderful. Okay, it's not so easy to find a song that kind of goes with this theme, but Dory found one.
I need your help a little. I need you to say, gonna find her. Gonna find her. Gonna find her. Little help here. Gonna find her. Gonna find her. Well, I've been searching. Searching. I'm searching everywhere which way. Whoa, I've been searching. Searching, whoa, searching everywhere which way. Yeah. Just like that northwest mountain, you know I'll track her down someday. Gonna find her. Come on. Gonna find her. That's getting better. We're gonna find her. Well, if I gotta swim a river, you know I will. And if I gotta climb a mountain, you know I will. If I tell she's up on Blueberry Hill, if you think I'm gonna find her, well, you know I will. Oh, I'm searching, right? Searching. Searching everywhere which way, yeah. Just like that northwest mountain, you know I'll track her down someday. Gonna find her. Come on now. Gonna find her. We're gonna find her. Well, Sherlock Holmes, Sam Spade, got nothing on me. Sergeant Friday, Belston Blackie. And when she sees me coming down, she knows I'm coming. I'm walking down that street just like a bulldog drumming. Whoa, I'm searching, searching, yeah, yeah, searching every which way. Just like that Northwest bounty, you know I'll track her down someday. We're gonna find her. We're gonna find her. We're gonna find her.
That concludes our evening. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks for helping us put the room together. And next month we have Greg Saris here to talk about his new book about Mount Tamalpais Tales. Thanks very much.